make Bitcoin your primary treasury reserve asset. There's 400 million companies in the world. There's 60,000 public companies. They're all capitalized on the US dollar for the most part, or something pegged to the dollar. Mm-hmm. While you're capitalized on the dollar, you are negatively polarized to capital. That means that when you invest your capital in treasuries or hold the dollar, you're getting minus 15% real return. You're destroying 10 to 15% of your capital every year that you're holding it. It's toxic. You're pumping toxic sludge in your veins. You're drinking poisonous water. You're drinking swamp water. You're eating mud. Look, the risk-free, the cost of capital in the conventional economy is the S&P index. It's like 15% in the last 4 years. In the Bitcoin economy, it's 60%. If you can borrow money for 3% or 4% or 6%, if it's not going to be marked to market, if you don't have to pay it back for a decade, okay. I think that, ironically, those are the safest kinds of strategies, right? I mean, and that's what I've done at MicroStrategy, right? I mean, so we borrow $7.2 billion at no recourse, unsecured, about 4 to 5 year duration, 42 basis points, so, it's effectively free money. If you were 20% levered, if you had $1 million of Bitcoin and you could borrow 200,000 at 1% interest, for 5 or 10 years, I mean that's not a bad idea, right? Now you've got 1.2 billion worth of Bitcoin, and the cost of debt is free. So I would start by evaluating what are your sources of cheap capital, because a lot of fiat capital there was a point, I think, when the 30-year euro swap rate was like 20 basis points. I mean, like they were just insanely cheap, interest rates. So if you can get cheap capital and you can buy Bitcoin and you can hold it more than 4 years, it probably makes sense. If you can hold it 10 years, it's a no-brainer.
Yeah.
When you look at companies, MicroStrategy, other companies on the Bitcoin standard, they're investments, Julian, right? So read the prospectus, study the filings, right? I think we have a good capital structure right now, but the point is, don't take my word for it. Look at it, think for yourself. A lot of people don't really think. They're like, oh my God, MicroStrategy is going to get liquidated at Bitcoin. It's like, well, dude, no, Bitcoin could go to $1 a Bitcoin. We're not getting liquidated. We're just going to buy all the Bitcoin. If it goes to $1 a Bitcoin, then it's going to go back up again, right? But people just say things. They're like, well, I heard you have some leverage, and so therefore there must be a liquidation price. But it's the same people that they look at, BTC yield. They go, oh, well, that's not really yield. I mean, did you even read the one-page 8K? Most of the people that just go free, they won't even read one page. Like, they can't get through 2 paragraphs of text, much less 20 pages. So if you're the kind of person that can't read 20 pages of investment filings, you probably shouldn't invest in stocks, and you probably shouldn't invest. You should just buy Bitcoin, put it in cold storage, and go to sleep for 30 years. And you'll be fine. The people in the crypto Twitter ecosystem, sometimes they don't really understand there's $500 trillion of capital and it's sitting in silos, and the capital has to be deployed in a certain way. So my advice to a private investor is, if you're not the smartest person in the room, if you're the smartest person in the room in the market, you are. Trust me. Like, when I'm the smartest guy in an industry, I know I'm the smartest guy in the industry because I know every single other actor in the industry, and then I will actually move aggressively. But I stay in my lane, and if you invite me into a poker game of a lot of stupid, dopey-looking people in the back room of a casino, and I'm not, I don't know any of them, and they all start betting big, I'm not the guy that thinks I'm the smartest guy at the table, right? I'm thinking maybe if I think I'm the smartest guy at the table, that's because they wanted me to think I'm the smartest guy at the table. So you ought to stay in your lane, and And if you're a public company investor, you know that you are. And trust me, they're pretty smart. And if you're a private equity investor, if you're a venture capitalist, then you're going to want to invest in companies that are ideally on the Bitcoin standard, right? And you would, if I was a venture capitalist, I would go looking for a company that's a private company that has a Bitcoin-backed treasury, and then I would make a private investment in them for preferred stock, maybe Bitcoin preferred stock, and I would say, here's $100 million. You have to buy at least 90 million of Bitcoin and not sell it. I want first lien on the Bitcoin. You can do whatever you want with the other $10 million, and you give me X% of the company. And then hopefully you go public in the next 24 months, and then their company will be valued at 3 times or 4x the multiple it is right now, and we're all going to make a lot of money. Make sure you stay in your lane. If you're not a professional investor, you shouldn't make investments. Bitcoin is not an investment. Bitcoin is savings. You're saving your money. You're buying desirable property. The metaphor is, I give you a choice. Do you want to buy 10,000 acres in Kansas or 10,000, 10,000 blocks of a city at a fair price, at a price that everybody else agrees is fair? Do you want to buy scarce desirable property at a fair market price and wait for some property developer to develop it in the future? Or would you like to take all your money and develop a mixed-use apartment complex, hotel chain, commercial office building, even though you don't know what you're doing? Right? If you have humility, you would say, I'm not the world's greatest real estate developer in New York City, and so for me to decide to spend all the money developing office spaces and hotels and nightclubs and restaurants and get all the zoning permits and decide on the type of concrete and hire the contractor and deal with the unions and rent the thing out, that's very risky. I don't think, you either know how to do it and you know you're the best, and then you should do it, or you don't. And if you don't know what you're doing, buy the underlying property and wait for someone that knows more than you do about how to develop the property, and let them do the heavy lifting, because one day they'll come to you and they'll say, I really need that 10,000 acres that you bought in Kansas. I'll give you 10 times as much money for it. I'm going to do all this stuff. I'm going to develop Disneyland in Kansas. Okay, and again, if you're arrogant, you'll go, no, I'm going to develop Disneyland in Kansas because I know more than Disney and I know more than you, and I'm not going to sell to you. Okay, well, that's just arrogant and stupid. You either should hold it because you don't need to sell it and wait for someone to develop a spaceport on your land, or you should sell it to the dude that's going to create Disneyland in Kansas for 10x your money, or you should borrow against it. But know what you know and stay in your lane. And I think like MicroStrategy is doing sophisticated things. We're securitizing Bitcoin in the capital markets. We're doing it because we can, because that's our best use of our assets. That doesn't mean you should. I'm not even telling you to invest in us. If you're smart enough to know that you should invest in us, then do it. But if you don't want to do it, don't, right? I am saying buy Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the risk-free, return in the market. If you don't want to do anything, take the money that you don't need for 10 years, whether you can, if you can sell equity in your company, if you can raise capital by mortgaging your company or mortgaging your house under good terms, or if you have cash lying around or cash flows, and you're asking me, what should you do with it? My answer is simple. It's what I've said every day for the past 4.5 years. You should buy Bitcoin, hold the Bitcoin, don't sell the Bitcoin.
And that's for a private investor. Now, if you look at companies, right, there are different companies. They're publicly traded, huge corporations. They're big private companies. They're small private companies, SMEs, and then there are startups. when it comes to Bitcoin treasury strategy, should they have different strategies, or is it the simple strategy you just laid out for everyone?
I think it's the same strategy for everybody, which is you ought to recapitalize on Bitcoin, make Bitcoin your primary treasury reserve asset. You should hold somewhere between 3 months and 12 months of cash in the local fiat currency that your liabilities are denominated in, whether it's the euro or the dollar or something. Mm-hmm. And then all the extra capital you have, you should just buy Bitcoin with it and hold it. And then if you can raise capital, you should raise as much capital as you can at a fair, if your company is worth 10 million, then you should raise $5 million in capital, buy $5 million of Bitcoin, hold it on your balance sheet, keep running your company, right? Mm. If you can raise 50 million, you should raise 50 million. If you can raise 500 million, you should raise 500 million. If you can raise 5 billion, you should raise 5 billion. It's very unlikely that your company is going to grow faster than 60% a year.
At least
it's very unlikely over 21 years that you'll grow faster than 29% a year without any more cash, without any more capital, right? So it's possible. I rather think that if you said to me you're going to grow more than 60% a year, I would say, well, you probably have to do that built on a capital structure of Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Like MicroStrategy's doing it, but we're doing it with Bitcoin.
Yeah.
We're not doing it against Bitcoin. So I think the idea is simple. It's there's 400 million companies in the world. There's 60,000 public companies. They're all capitalized on the US dollar for the most part, or something pegged to the dollar. Mm-hmm. Okay, just recapitalize your company on BTC. While you're capitalized on the dollar, you are negatively polarized to capital. That means that when you invest your capital in treasuries or hold the dollar, you're getting minus 15% real return. You're destroying 10 to 15% of your capital every year that you're holding it. It's toxic. You're pumping toxic sludge in your veins. You're drinking poisonous water. You're drinking swamp water. You're eating mud. Okay, what's my suggestion? Stop drinking swamp water. Stop eating mud. Clean capital. Pump Bitcoin into your corporate veins. Bitcoin is plus 60% a year. That means it's 45% better a year than the S&P index. It's better than your own company, right? Bitcoin is outperforming 99.9% or 99.99% of all the companies in the world. So if you have a big ego, you think you're better. You think you've got this massive ego. You're going to outperform Bitcoin? I doubt it. But even if so, even if you thought you were going to outperform Bitcoin, the smart thing to do is next time you raise money, double the amount of money you raise and put half of it into Bitcoin, because that's the obvious diversification. You're buying a company growing 60% a year at 1 times revenue. There's not a single competent CEO in the world that wouldn't buy a company at 1 times revenue that was growing 60% a year that might decelerate to 30% a year. So it's a very simple strategy. Recapitalize on Bitcoin. When you do it, you'll be positively polarized to capital. You're creating a magnetic field that's attracting capital. When you become positively polarized to capital, that means you'll be able to raise 100 million. Well, first you'll raise 10 million, then you'll raise 100 million, then you'll raise $1 billion, then you'll raise 10 billion, then you'll raise 100 billion. You'll slurp all the capital out of the ecosystem. That's what Metaplanet's doing in Japan.
Yep.
That's what MicroStrategy is doing in the US. That's what Mara is doing right now. Yep. That's what Riot is doing, right? Luckily for you, only 6 out of 60,000 publicly traded companies are doing it aggressively. And just a handful of the 400 million private companies.